I'm going to try to speak on the Agenda 2030, on leaving no one behind principle, on the decade of action and delivery, on how we can and how we need to mobilize and accelerate our work towards these goals. But well, let me start by just stating that we live in a world with multiple crises, multiple parallel and mutually reinforcing crises. Climate change being our biggest threat to livelihoods, to human life, to security, health, all across the globe, with the extreme loss of biodiversity and degradation of ecosystems that we see. This is by far our strongest and worst crisis that we now need to mobilize to fight and to win. We also see a crisis for democracy, for human rights, a shrinking space for civil society organizations, for the free media, less respect for the rule of law, and something we've seen for many years now. This also comes into the pressure that is put on women's rights, on gender equality. Just during last year, we saw a rise of violence against women, of gender-based violence, that was up by 30% worldwide, which is of course a completely unacceptable development. War and conflict still affecting all parts of our planet, all parts of our lives, forcing people to flee and putting a barrier to development. And we also see poverty being much more concentrated in these fragile and conflict affected countries, context around the world. Conflicts are procrastinated. It seems so that it's much harder to reach peace, to uphold peace, and to sustain peace around the world, which is something that needs our attention much more now than maybe two, 3 decades ago, where peace treaties were something that we could expect. This is now something that is far further away from us than ever. We have the pandemic, COVID-19, and not only as a health crisis, which it definitely is, but also the way we handle this pandemic brings socioeconomic consequences far beyond what we've seen before. The World Bank estimates another 150 million people being pushed out of extreme poverty this year because the value chains are completely collapsed due to the pandemic and its lockdowns and how we treat this. So this is both a health crisis, but it's also a socioeconomic crisis with job losses, opportunities, livelihoods being broken, and that we need to recover and fix. This brings along a debt situation around the world, which is completely not sustainable. Countries now trying to mobilize enough financial resources to try to push for a recovery is stuck with unsustainable debt, which is something we need to put our attention to. Inequalities have been inside and between countries have grown the last decades, and due to the pandemic, we also see now the risk of these inequalities being accelerated, polarizing the world even more, and that is of course a threat not only for us who wants to build democracy, but for us who wants to build any type of development. Viruses, they say, doesn't make a difference on people, whether your color of your skin or where in the world you live, how much money you have in your wallet. But let's make very clear, a pandemic does make a change, does make difference of people. So even if the virus doesn't, the pandemic definitely does. We have seen, it's very clear, the most vulnerable, also the worst hit, both by the pandemic and its socioeconomic consequences. And this, of course, have led to immense humanitarian needs around the world. Starvation, people seeking refuge, and this is, of course, something that is very difficult for us to meet because we have a large funding gap in the humanitarian needs vis-a-vis the humanitarian resources that we have available. And we need to find ways to bridge this gap and to make sure that we can meet these growing humanitarian needs wherever they are. So we have all these crises, many of them we had before, but COVID-19 definitely accelerates all this development. and has shown us how fast a local crisis can become a global one. It has shown us how interconnected we are as societies, but also as people, that we are one and that we need to solve this crisis as one. We need to recover better and build back better and greener as one. And we have to make sure that to use these crises, to turn them around, to see them as an opportunity, and to build back better to a society, to a world more sustainable, more equal, more gender equal, as one, as people inhabiting this planet together. So this past year, of course, has been challenging to all of us. It's exposed our societies. It has exposed our vulnerabilities. And if we are to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, by 2030, we have to see them. We have to see this map of Sustainable Development Goals as a roadmap out of these crises and into a new and better world. With this integrated approach, it is exactly the type of roadmap that we all need and that we should strive to work and fulfill. And we all need all actors to be included on this, all parts of society, private sector, academia, public agencies, governments, civil society, and including in this civil society, of course, faith-based organizations playing an immense and crucial role around the world in bringing hope, bringing faith, but also bringing those basic services to people around the world that we need to lift ourselves out of a momentum of crisis and into a momentum of opportunities. Faith-based organizations are important drivers of positive change, both as on a normative level and through, of course, your unique competence and role that you play in many societies around the world. 80% of the world's population is religious. And in Africa, 75% of the population, and this we know from polls, they trust their faith leaders more than they trust their governments. So belief systems impact all of our lives and serve an important purpose in providing both moral guidance on the ways in which we can treat people, the way we can treat our planet, but at the community level, also an important role in the shifting of norms that sometimes create barriers when we try to achieve development and our SDGs. So the role of faith-based organizations on the social dimension of sustainable development is very clear. And in many cases, organizations like yours are among the main providers of these social services, education, healthcare, and other protection systems that we are so desperate in the need of. So, and I saw a number recently that it's estimated that faith-based organizations control half of the schools worldwide. And I think that shows what a catalytic role you play in providing people with tools needed to live in this world and to create a better world for themselves and for us as humans. But let's not forget also the impact that your organizations play on the economic and more environmental dimensions of sustainable development. The potential of faith-based and faith-led organizations around the world to contribute to the SDGs are significant. And I know all of you are working very hard to do this, just that. And also Sweden's development cooperation is carried out in partnership with faith-based development actors around the world. We appreciate this partnership, both in the programming of interventions and work in the field-based context, but of course also on the more policy-related work that we do on development cooperation. So friends, this brings me to the role of Swedish development actors at large in our joint efforts to achieve the SDGs. And we have a very well-established forms of cooperation with partners, both nationally and internationally. And we have a special strategy for capacity development, for partnership and method, which is our guiding framework in this work. And local ownership and capacity development are, of course, key for us to succeed here. We try to provide flexible, non-earmarked funding, core support to our partners, and this facilitates partnerships and adaptation of projects to local context and to customs around the world. And the strategy stresses that the role of SIDA and the Swedish Institute as our implementing agencies play the role that they play in strengthening the Swedish resource base, innovative working methods, and providing capacity building and raising awareness and visibility of the 2030 agenda in our partner countries. And this is something we could not do without partners in civil society, both here in Sweden and around the world. Many Swedish actors are involved in this effort, including public authorities, business, local, regional administrations, and so on, higher education institutions. But I would say civil society organizations and social partners are among the most important for us to succeed in this effort. So the multitude of actors that are involved in this work talks to the strategic approach for the implementation of the Agenda 2030 in a whole of society approach to ensure that our efforts by the government is coherent and mutually reinforcing to many different actors, including, of course, faith-based organizations. And the inclusion of faith actors is part of ensuring a broader cultural sensitivity in all development processes. And Sweden is trying to lead the way. We provided a bill to Parliament in December last year with an overarching goal to achieve the 2030 agenda with an emphasis on policy coherence for sustainable development and the principle of leaving no one behind, trying to mobilize support across parties, across our Parliament also for this endeavor. And we hope that this bill will ensure that we all work in a coherent fashion towards the implementation, of course, of the SDGs. Let me continue by highlighting also some of Sweden's priorities in this decade of action and delivery. And friends, I mean, we know we are all falling short to the promise of leaving no one behind. Even before the pandemic, income inequalities, as I said, they were growing, leaving many people behind with regards to healthcare, to education, housing, good quality nutrition, access to clean water, sanitations, and other necessities and basic rights. And the United Nations Development Programme estimates that an additional 207 million people could be pushed now out in extreme poverty by the end of 2030 as a long-term consequence also of the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, a completely unacceptable development that we all need to mobilize to try to change. And a new report also by Oxfam shows that this pandemic has the potential to increase inequality in almost every country at once. And this is something we need to find solutions to. How can we build back better? How can we mobilize for an economic recovery that shrinks spaces in this sense, that shrinks inequalities, that builds equality instead of growing inequalities that we've seen the last decades? So to deliver on this principle of leaving no one behind, Sweden presented a short report at the high-level political forum on the SDGs in 2020 with 7 points of action, which set the course for this decade of action and delivery. So the report calls for a green transition, for full respect of human rights, access to participation, decent working conditions, universal social protection systems, and treating poverty as a multifaceted phenomenon that should be eradicated in all its dimensions. You know, poverty is not just about money and choice, it's also about power and voice. And we need to remember this. We also place a stronger emphasis on strengthening access to quality data, to statistics, that we can follow up on the situation for different groups in an ethical way. So we stress all this, but I want to uphold just on a little thing, is that we also, there's one area where I think the Agenda 2030 is not bold enough, it's not ambitious enough, and that is on the call for human rights and democracy and respect of rule of law. This is something that could have been more expressed in the agenda, and an area where Sweden has higher ambitions than what is stated in Agenda 2030. So discriminatory laws, norms, and barriers that, for example, exclude women and marginalized groups from participation and demanding respect for fundamental rights is, of course, a big barrier to development. Shrinking democratic space was a concern, has been a concern for a long time. It is an even more stronger concern now as a consequence of the pandemic also. And these challenges has to be faced and has to be met, and we have to overcome them, and we have to again expand space for democracy, expand space for human rights, and for civil society actors, including faith-based organizations, to take their righteous part in society and participate in building a more sustainable society. So this is and this shrinking space is also, I mean, it is a direct threat to the freedom of religion or the freedom of belief worldwide. And we need to work in an integrated fashion with freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom of assembly and association, I think. So we've launched an initiative that we call Drive for Democracy. We launched it in 2019, and it responds directly to these challenges. It focuses on strengthening civil society, human rights, rule of law, free and independent media, and try to support democratic processes, as well as women's and young people's democratic engagement. And this drive for democracy is also mutually reinforcing our feminist foreign policy, where we always strive to put girls' and women's rights, resources, and representations on the table wherever we are and wherever we work. I want to end on some notes on climate change. Maybe you think that I've spoken too long by now, but let me take just a couple of minutes also to talk about climate change. And colleagues, this is because the proportion of young people in the world today is the largest one we've ever had, the largest one in history. And their message on climate change is clear. We need to act and we need to listen. And this is a message that is shared by an increasing number of also religious leaders around the world, such as Pope Francis. For several years now, he's been on a crusade to promote a culture of care for us to combat climate change. And I think it's fair to say that this is our biggest challenge right now to any type of human development that is at stake. Recovering after the COVID-19 pandemic and this crisis should be also a moment where we speed up green transitions towards carbon neutrality, resilience, phasing out fossil fuels, building our economy on renewable energy. And the latest Human Development Report coming out of the United Nations Development Programme presented an adjustment to Human Development Index for planetary pressures. And many countries, including Sweden, need to step up efforts to support the realization of the social and economic dimensions of development within planetary boundaries. Mitigating, adapting to climate change, more efficient, more circular use of resources, safeguarding biodiversity and ecosystem services. This will be vital for us to improve resilience and safeguard the future of both people and planet. And faith-based organizations are important in this effort, especially for the inclusion of indigenous communities who play an essential role in ensuring the sustainable management of land resources, providing ecosystem services, and conserving biodiversity. In 2022, the world will be celebrating the anniversary of the first United Nations Conference of the Human Environment that was held in Stockholm 50 years ago. This was a unique conference, and its twin moral principles of social justice and environmental responsibility. And Sweden will host now a Stockholm +50 conference, a high-level meeting to enhance action and to accelerate sustainable transformation, which leaves no one behind and creates a healthy planet for all. We are ready to take action with our partners for people, for planet, for prosperity. And I'm convinced that if we all nurture the Sustainable Development Goals by working together, integrating them into our recovery, we will build stronger, more socially, economically, and environmentally resilient societies that will stand steady beyond the year of 2030. We have to work hard so that those SDGs, those new SDGs that the Secretary General will call all of us to hear our views on, the SDGs for 2050 that we heard about in the session before I spoke, that they are not just a control or just a copy of the Sustainable Development Goals that we have right now, but we have to make sure that we can leverage, that we can reach these goals so that the next generation can put the objectives and the goals of their generation on the table. As Dag Hammarskjöld, a Swedish diplomat with deep Christian faith, puts it in his book Markings, in our age, the road to holiness necessarily passes through the world of action. My friends, I think that is the decade of action and delivery. With this, I thank you very much. I look forward to some questions and I wish you the best of inspirational days. Thank you very much.